Okay, so in this video, I'm going to talk about why trauma is not what happened to you. So it's not the bad things, the bad memories, the bad events, the bad experiences. It's actually something else. And that this new way of understanding trauma, quote unquote, is actually a really beautiful, positive thing because it leads to new, powerful, useful solutions. So I'm going to talk about that, why it's really good news, and what we can all do today to resolve this trauma without going back into the memory, back into what happened to us, analyzing and talking about it and journaling about it. That's not really necessary for the most part. Okay? So let's get started. So the first thing I want to talk about is this whole idea that trauma is not what happens to us, right? I've been there before when I thought, okay, if I could just figure out what happened to me when I was 3 years old or 7 years old or 12 years old, maybe it was when my parents got divorced. Maybe it was when that thing happened at school. If I could just figure that out, everything would change. And whatever issue I feel like I'm stuck with or working through or challenged by, that would be resolved. Okay, and I tried that for many, many years, decade. I think a whole decade. It did not work. Spoiler. And so at some point, though, I stumbled onto this idea that trauma is not what happened to us. It's not the bad things that happen. What it actually is the emotions that have been left over, the energy, the stress, the survival energy that is left over from that experience. So an example of this is, let's say you're 5 years old, you're riding your bike, you fall over, and what you want to do is you want to burst into tears and cry. But for whatever reason, mom or dad or someone runs over to you and picks you up, and they don't want you to cry because it makes them feel guilty or it makes them feel scared. So they try and, no, don't cry, you're okay. Boys don't cry. They might say different things like this. And what ends up happening basically is that you wanted to cry, but you didn't, right? You wanted to scream, but you didn't. Right? And so there was an impulse, an energetic setup in your body, we might say, an emotion that wanted to come through you, but it didn't. And it doesn't just go away. And if you want any evidence of this, just look at how many people have triggers, buttons that we all have them, right? We can all push into them. That's what these buttons are. It's like these old emotions, these old energies that we haven't expressed, haven't felt, haven't worked through. That is the trauma. That's how I think about trauma now. It's not the event, right? Yeah, sure, maybe you fell off your bike. Maybe some bad thing that happened to you. My parents got divorced when I was 7, but it's not really about the event. It was a bad thing, sure, cool. But it's the energetics, the underlying emotions of that event. So like if I wanted to scream at someone, my parents, for example, when that happened and I didn't, what happens to that energy? What happens to that anger and that rage? If it doesn't come out in that, it gets stuck. That is the trauma. Right? Not the event, but the emotion, the emotional residue, we might say, the stored survival energy. We can call it lots of different things, the prana, the chi, whatever. The point is, we wanted to say something. We wanted to do something. We wanted to run away. We wanted to attack. Sometimes it's just saying things. We wanted to say something like, fuck you, or I hate you so much. And we couldn't because it wasn't safe. And so it's like the pipe gets blocked, waiting for a time when that can actually come out. And that's where it leads to the solution. Or it's like you don't actually have to analyze the thing that happened to you in a million different ways to get to the bottom of it. All you need to do is get to that energy, right? How can we get to the underlying trauma, the underlying survival stress, the underlying emotional residue from these experiences? How can we get to that and release that, right? Then things resolve. We don't actually really need the memory. The memory is a bit of a gateway into the experience. If you think about some bad thing that happened to you, it can activate the emotion, which is a sensory, ultimately in the experience. We feel it in the body, right? So the memory can be a gateway into that, but the main key, the main practice is the feeling of it, is the crying, is the raging, is the feeling scared, right? Feeling it's the feeling of the feeling, the expressing of the feeling, the saying of the words, all of that didn't get to happen back then. If we can get that to happen now, that's what resolves things, right? And that's why this is such good news, because it's like I said, you don't need to figure out the memory or analyze it. You just need to get at the underlying emotion beneath it, right? The question is, how do you do that? In some ways, it's very simple, right? The reason it didn't come out when you were 5 years old or 7 years old or 19 years old, whatever, is because it wasn't safe, right? You wanted to scream at mom or dad and tell them whatever mean or nasty thing. You wanted to roar, but you couldn't because they're bigger, they're stronger, they're your source of food and sustenance and connection. You can't scream at them. It's not safe, because if you do that, you may rupture that connection so much that you die. I'm not saying this is conscious. It's not logical. It's just a survival program in the body, right? So it wasn't safe to let it out. So the first step in this process is to establish and cultivate a felt sense of safety in your system, right? Because it's the lack of safety that made this stuff stay stuck inside you. So it's the opposite of that, as in instead of a lack of safety, a non-lack, like a presence of safety, that's what allows this stuff to come up and release, because the system's like, oh, finally, it's safe enough for me to let this out. It's safe enough for me to cry. It's safe enough for me to rage, right? So step one is always safety. Now, part of that safety comes from knowing how to recognize safety in your environment, right? And the people around you and the space that you're in. It also comes from understanding some of what you're doing here, the dynamics of this, the nervous system, survival physiology. Why do we go into fight, flight, and freeze? Where do these emotions come from? That, even just the theory of it, creates a certain level of safety, because you start to understand, oh, I'm not a bad person because I'm angry with mom or dad or whoever. It's just my system trying to protect me. It's basic and human, and it's just part of my experience. There's nothing wrong with it. It just is what it is. And that creates a certain level of safety for these things to release, because you're no longer afraid of being angry or afraid of being sad, right? So there is the theory, which creates the safety. There is, learning to, they call it orienting, right? So looking around at the safety in your environment, noticing that, okay, there's no scary things around here right now. Can I just see that? Can I see that it's neutral, right? Everything's pretty still and calm, provided that it is. If you're not in a safe environment, you'll know it. But if it is safe, actually taking time to pay attention to the fact that it's safe and looking for signs of safety. Maybe it's not completely safe all the time, but at least right now in one specific moment, can it be safe? If you look at the wall, is the wall dangerous? Probably not. I guess it could collapse, but the chances of that are pretty low. Right? So we're rebuilding that safety map, and that takes time. I'm not saying it's overnight. I'm not saying it's easy or quick. And depending on what we've been through, sometimes the danger map will be really well developed. So this is a process, right? So we need the theory. We need how to find safety in the environment. As that safety comes online, that's when all this stuff from the past can start to come up. It starts to go, oh, now it's safe enough for me to let this anger come up. It's safe enough for me to let this fear come up. And as those things start to come up, yes, we will start to cry. We might start to rage, right? These things, these expressions, these things we wanted to say will start to come up and express. And that can be difficult, but it's also a beautiful and healing thing. And as that happens, that's when these things get resolved. Sometimes we don't even know what the memory is. A lot of the stuff that I've been through, released, there's been no memory with it. It's just come up. I don't know what this is about, but I'll cry, I guess. Cool. And then it's done. And the more I do that, the more settled the system gets, the safer I feel, the more comfortable I am just being myself. It's a beautiful thing. It is the most beautiful thing you can do, in my experience. In my opinion, this is the only game in town. Everyone's engaged in this game in some way, but you can do it directly. And that's what I'm talking about. Okay? So, to summarize all of that, trauma is not in the event. It's not the bad thing that happened to you. It's not the memory. It is the underlying emotional, energetic residue, the things you wanted to say, the things you wanted to do, the times you wanted to cry and couldn't, the times you wanted to rage. And that is the trauma. Not the event, but the energetic residue, the emotional residue, the stored survival stress. We can call it a million different things, but I think you get it. You've got the memory, which is a story, like a movie that we've played, but it's the emotion, the feeling, the energetics behind it that counts. You deal with that, and then the memory is no longer really relevant. Okay? So, I hope that was helpful. If you enjoyed that, please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button. I'm going to put a video up here or here so you can try a free exercise from the Rage Heart Academy. It's lesson 1, free here on YouTube. Got a question, leave a comment, and that's all for now. Oh, if you want to join the newsletter where I send out these weekly updates, go to rageheart.co. That's like Braveheart, but rage heart.co.